Absolutely. That's a nice segue into the third question. Though I'm sure Toby now thinks it's the fourth question. But third question,
I can
which is how
count.
to
I can count, Bill.
This is the Attorney Business Development Podcast. My name is Bill Burns, and today my co-host Tobi Steinemann and I are going to continue our journey through the 7 essential business development questions. We're going to move on to the second question, and to add your confusion, Toby, the second question is really 2 questions.
Well, hi, Bill. 2 questions in one. So if you already have multiple questions, why did you put 2 questions in one question then?
It was important because really the second aspect of this is really the essence of business development for attorneys. So the first question, the first part of the second question, the first part of the second question is, what does the client want or need? The second part of that is, do we agree with the client's assessment?
Does that mean you don't trust your clients to know what they need or what they want?
It means that you are an attorney and you've been trained to be an advisor and a counselor, and you want to give them the best advice. If you're just going to take their word for what they need and how they think they should solve a problem, you're just an order taker. And, that doesn't differentiate you from your competition. Anybody can do that type of commodity work. What we're talking about is trying to really develop a relationship where the client trusts your judgment, looks to you for advice and counsel and direction, and wants you to question their thinking.
I guess it's not a attorney-specific problem, right? I mean, we all in service-oriented professions, we kind of face that issue that we deal with clients or customers who think they need something, but essentially if you try to spend time on really figuring out what kind of problem they are actually trying to solve, then you realize, okay, there's other things that you actually need to do first.
A lot of people talk about, value add. Well, that's where the value add is. When you bring something being a different perspective, an expanded view, new information, the benefit of previous experience, all of those things add significantly to the client's experience and better position you to be an advisor in the long term.
Do you have an example of an issue that you had with one of your attorneys where there was a difference between what they wanted and what they needed?
I've got examples where it was different in terms of the scope of the project, where it was different in terms of the budget necessary to get the project completed. I've run across positions where the contact that we had with the company had a different view of what needed to be accomplished in that particular instance than it wasn't necessarily consistent with the organization's overall strategy, or in one case wasn't consistent with her boss's strategy, the time frame, all of those things. And it also underscores one of the reasons that I hate responding to RFPs, because most of those processes, they lay out what they want. You're usually prohibited from interacting. You can submit questions, but you really can't get down to the essence of what the problem is. So I think there's lots of ways that attorneys can go the wrong direction and do go the wrong direction here.
So the RFP process is actually preventing you from doing your job because you're just serving what they say that they want, but it's not necessarily what's actually helpful. So it's probably quite difficult to approach a client in that sense. I think that could also backfire if you approach it in the wrong way.
I think you have to approach it in terms of your experience and the information that you have at hand. I'll give you an example. We recently had a prospect actually, who came to us, and they were concerned because a competitor of theirs had a particular license that allowed them to do things that this prospect could not do. And they were absolutely certain that if they obtained this license, they would be able to compete with this competitor. As it turns out, the license that this competitor claimed that they have doesn't exist. The competitor was overstating what their capabilities were. So, the entire assignment changed based on our feedback to the prospect that, well, yeah, it'd be nice to have a license that did all those things, but doesn't exist. And so let's talk about what is a solution that we really can approach here.
Is there anything else that we need to consider when we think about the client's wants or needs?
Well, we talked a little bit about making sure they understand the full scope of the project. I think it's also important to kind of ask a lot of detailed questions about how this project aligns with what the company is trying to accomplish overall. Again, we ran into a situation one time where the client had one expectation, the client contact had one idea about what they wanted to accomplish, which was primarily going to benefit them in their career path, but that wasn't particularly aligned with where that individual's boss wanted this particular piece of litigation to get resolved. The boss was more interested in a quick resolution, avoiding any public notice of the suit, whereas the contact thought they could be a big hero by saving the company money, even though it was a bad fact pattern. And so that was a difficult situation for us to work through in terms of getting a resolution that everybody was happy with.
And I guess, I mean, also if you're trying to figure out what they actually need, some industry knowledge might help, right? So you understand a little bit what other firms are doing, like you said, the example with the license, but then also in terms of where the market is going. I think that's also where this kind of industry knowledge can come in and be helpful.
Absolutely critical. One of the things that I say mostly to litigators, because they don't tend to have as much of a business focus or to follow business as closely as most corporate attorneys do, is that they need to follow business so they have a full understanding of the way business people think and a full understanding of what's actually happening in the business world and in the markets, because it has a dramatic impact on how a client may approach a particular litigation matter. The other thing that I think is very important is for attorneys, in these days where we can get on a Teams call, conduct most of our business via email, often it's very important to go to the site and see the particular situation that the client is talking about to get a really full understanding of what the facts are.
Helpful on multiple sides, right? I mean, keeping these relationships close and alive to identify additional business and just keeping a good relationship, like we've been saying all over in these discussions and podcasts.
Absolutely. That's a nice segue into the third question. Though I'm sure Toby now thinks it's the fourth question, but third question, which is
I can count, Bill.
How do our services align with the client or the prospect's needs? And again, you can't fully answer that question if you haven't answered question number 2. You don't have the opportunity to be able to determine clearly whether we have the right resources. Do we have the capacity? Do we have the experience to do the level of work we want to do here? Do we have the geographic presence? And can we be cost competitive? Or do we even have credibility in the desired area? I guess, I interact with attorneys who are on both ends of the scale, some who are extremely conservative and saying, well, I don't have that experience or I don't have that depth of experience. I'm hesitant to take on that matter. And then I have other attorneys who say, well, I can figure anything out. But I think, reality lies somewhere in between, and how well you can serve the client is, whether you have the right kind of experience. The other, another question there is, does what the client want to get done, does that fit in with the brand, the culture, the direction of the firm? Sometimes you'll get into a situation where there's a political aspect to an issue that may not align with where the client or where the firm feels it should be positioned in the marketplace.
What I really like about the way you structure this framework is that it's so close to what the client actually needs. I think a lot of business development or marketing really happens on the selling side. So firms and lawyers who think, okay, this is what we can do. So now let's find someone who needs that or who wants that, in a sense that they're trying to push something on to clients that might not even need it or require it. Whereas I think that from a marketing point of view, it's really the opposite way, right? You need to first understand what is something that you can actually sell because it's requested and needed, and then try to figure out how you can offer it. I mean, if you're a data protection lawyer, for instance, and a couple of years ago everybody needed these data protection agreements. I mean, at least in Europe they did, and now this business is completely dead because it's all automated and AI written data protection declarations. A lot of clients, they just download these kind of declarations and then use that.
Absolutely. And that kind of comes to the next question, which is how can we educate the client or the prospect that we can meet their needs? And too often, as you just described, Toby, everybody jumps to this step. Everybody jumps to let's promote this because we think we're very good at it. I always use the example in communication. If you have a bunch of people who are in Zurich, for example, and you want to take them to Paris, Paris, you don't send a plane to Berlin. You have to pick up people where they are. And too often we make the mistake of not thinking about where our audience is in terms of their readiness to hear our message. We have to meet them based on their needs. That's when the messages really start to click. That's when all the efforts we put into the website or our individual bios or being on social media, all of the tools that we can use, that's when they're most effective. One of the things that I promote a lot, and unfortunately I don't get enough people to take me up on doing this, is I think lunch and learns are a great way to really educate a client and to build and deepen relationships. If you've taken the time to understand what a client's interested in, go out to the client, spend, an hour with them over lunch, take some food with you. That makes everybody happy, increases the number of people who want to attend. But then you get the opportunity to really have a conversation about what it is the client's trying to achieve and how you can help them. That's a great way to really bring that marketing down to an individual basis.
So why do you think is that it's so difficult to get lawyers to do that?
I think they're just afraid to ask the client. Often I hear the excuse that I don't have the time, that I'm too busy. But I think it's more than that. I think they're afraid to ask because it might lead to more things that they may not know how to handle. I also think sometimes attorneys are interested in keeping that work to themselves, and it might mean expanding and bringing in a colleague. And I think a lot of times people are afraid of cross-selling.
It's also a bit out of their comfort zone, maybe, right?
Absolutely. That's what I mean by they're afraid to ask, is outside their comfort zone. That's not the usual thing that they do. It's not how they've never done it before. It's something new and they're afraid it'll backfire.
And I mean, it's natural if you haven't been trained to do something like that, it's not in your usual line of work to be a bit hesitant. But isn't there a way how we can help them to have the confidence that it's not something bad that they're doing, but something that is actually useful?
In reality, it puts them, it's much better than giving a speech to an audience full of 100 people, because in reality, you're not really giving a speech in these lunch and learns. It's more of an open, larger conversation. And that's where most attorneys really shine, because that's what they do every day. They answer questions, they respond to individual concerns, and that's what you're doing in a lunch and learn type situations. I'd much rather see people invest their time in doing that than speaking to a large group of people where it's really hard to make that individual connection. And where it can't be, when you're doing a presentation, you're talking in broad terms, whereas if you're sitting down with individuals in one company, you can talk about their specific circumstance and come to, much faster way to getting an assignment, getting work to do for that client.
Communication wise, I mean, up until a couple of years ago, or up until recently even, there was quite a high drive for expanding digital marketing capacities, and there was almost a bit like a shift away from having these personal meetings, so that it's kind of cheaper and it gives you a broader reach and more access to new potential business. And now sort of it feels a bit like there's a tendency to go back to personal interactions as well, to appreciate the contact that you have, the direct contact you have with people. But I have maybe one question to the educating part. We always tell attorneys that they shouldn't be talking about themselves all the time, and now we ask them to educate the client. How do you bring these two together?
That's an excellent question, Toby. I mean, it's a question of sequence. I mean, at the beginning of an interaction with a client, with a prospect, it really is about asking and listening so that you get the information, so that when it is your turn to educate, to talk about yourself, to talk about your firm, to talk about your capabilities, you do so in a way that connects with the prospect or the client. You do so in a way that's relevant to what they're interested in. And that allows you to deepen the conversation, deepen the relationship, and really find the opportunity to walk away with an assignment or with work. Otherwise, it's just, you're just saying words that you hope connect. This way, the words are going to connect because the client has told you what they want. And so now you're supplying the answers. You're supplying the direction that someone should go. You're starting to provide the advice that will get them to the solution they're seeking.
So here you're actually allowed to talk about yourself.
Absolutely, but you're talking about yourself in the context of what they want, and that makes it much more relevant, much more valuable, much more effective.
So that was point 4, if I've been counting correctly.
So the next step, which is the one that everybody really wants, is how do we sell the client on our ability to meet their needs? We've gone through the steps of listening to them, of building rapport, of identifying what their pain points are, which goes to your point about now it's time for us to talk and offer our solutions to address any objections that they have, and then to ask for the business. That's step 5. A lot of people rush to step 5 right off the bat, and they wonder why they're not successful. It's because they haven't done all the previous work to really be positioned to win the work when they ask for the work.
What kind of a role does competition play in that step?
Well, the role the competition plays is that the more information you get from the client, the better you can personalize your response to their needs. That's probably one of the best ways to differentiate yourself from the competition. When we're doing postmortems after we've been involved in trying to get work, one of the things I hear most often when we win is that we listened really well to what they wanted. Sometimes when we don't win, I hear that we didn't listen so well, or that we missed a point, that we didn't have the proper scope. And, that can happen as a result of a number of things. But I think that really is important to differentiate yourself by being as close to the client as you possibly can be and close to the information you need.
That reminds me of a concept we also learned in business school. It's called the value box or something. If you think about your offer, it's like a box, and that contains all the values that your offer has to the client. So the client is trying to solve a problem, and they will buy from you if they see that your package has more value to them as it compared to the other party. And the price tag that is attached to this offer is not something. It's not a value that belongs into the box. It's something that is attached to it. So it's only a way of comparing offer A to offer B. And then you basically have a simple equation. You have offer A that has a price tag A, and you have offer B that has a price tag B. And then you can just compare where do you get more value for the money that you're actually asked to pay for it. But I think a lot of companies, they think that being cheap is a value to the client. It's actually not, because they are trying to solve a problem. And if you are the one understanding that problem and providing a solution that works for them, then you're already in the pole position. Obviously, if another company does it exactly the same way or equally good, then it will be about a price comparison. But usually that's not where law firms work, right? Unless they're in some sort of commodity space, which most firms are not operating in.
Yeah, we recently lost an opportunity where we were on the price pretty even with the competition. But the competition had done a much better job of providing a solution that was very closely aligned with where the prospect wanted to go. That was the sole difference. So yeah, you're right. You can take price out of the equation as long as you're in the same ballpark as your competition if you add more value.
Yeah, I mean, it's first of all, you need to understand, like you said, what is a value. What is of value to the client, right? Because of what one client might be looking for and appreciate what they need. That's completely something completely different than another client. So it needs to be something that is what you're offering needs to be something of value to that client, and they also need to understand it and see it in your offer. Because sometimes also there is something that we could do or provide, but we don't communicate it well. They don't see it, they don't understand it, and if they don't understand it or see it, then they cannot attribute some sort of value to it, and then they're also not understanding why you charge the amount of money that you charge, right? So there's a disconnect between the price and the value that you think your perceived value and the client's perceived value is completely different.
And that's really important because in many cases, you're dealing with prospects or clients who aren't attorneys and who don't understand exactly what it takes to get something done. They don't understand the amount of work or the amount of relationships that have to be built, the amount of communication or information that has to be collected. They don't fully understand that. So you have to drive through to the value equation of what you're doing. Otherwise, it's just seen as being too expensive. When we started these podcasts, we promised we keep them to 20 minutes or less. And we want to keep our promises because we know that's important. So we're going to break here and pick up with the rest of this circle of 7 steps, 7 essential questions of business development on our next episode.